They bob with insolent ease in the breakers of the Atlantic surf. They're one of Britain's largest mammals, and there are at least 100,000 of them around our coasts. Men have always looked with affection bordering on envy at these sleek, self-sufficient ocean travellers. Recently, many seals in southern Britain suffered badly from a viral disease. But the seals of the Western Isles of Scotland escaped. This is the story of the seals of the wild shores in the Outer Hebrides. Ashore, a seal is a clumsy, lumbering envelope of fat and muscle. But beneath the surface, to appreciate its real sea life and character, that's where the cameras must be prepared to follow. It's small wonder that sailors and fishermen for centuries have attributed magical, even human qualities to seals. In some remote parts, they're even called the people of the sea. For some 8,000 years, the fate of seals has been entwined with the lives of men. These ruined crofts in the Outer Hebrides once belonged to seal hunters. Some northern hunters believed that there was only one seal and that you killed it again and again. If you didn't respect your seal, it wouldn't be there next time to provide oil for your lamps and skin for your garments. The men who lived here were superstitious folk. When a hunter was drowned, they believed that a seal came ashore to console his widow and perhaps even father the child he could no longer have. This convenient story has been preserved in a ballad that has many variations, but whose theme remains the same.
I heard a mother dandling her ben, and she'd rock it and she'd sing. Oh, little ken I my Benny's done, nor yet the land that he lives in. Then in there came a great grey seal, and laid himself down there at her feet. I'll tell you where his daddy is. He's lying here down at your feet. I am a man upon the land. I am a seal when I'm in the sea, and when I'm far from every strand. Me home is in the North Country.
Though seals breed as far south as Cornwall, the North Country of the ballad is their stronghold. Seals breed on many Scottish islands, but the Outer Hebrides hold by far the largest breeding population of grey seals and a fair percentage of common seals as well. It was to South Uist in the Outer Hebrides that Liz and Tony Bomford set out in late May. There are few wilder or more remote places in the British Isles. The survival team's first objective was the sheltered east coast of South Uist. The small skerries and islets there hold a population of several hundred common seals. The team chose a sheltered sea loch called Loch Einort, which has its own breeding population of about 80 common seals. With their assistant, Julian Mackey, Tony and Liz Bomford made a reconnaissance of Loch Einort with a view to filming not only the breeding story of the common seals, but also their life underwater.
Okay then, shall we go? Okay, everybody.
The sea off the Outer Isles is by no means ideal for underwater filming. By tropical standards, it's almost opaque. Liz and Tony had previous experience of the problems and hoped to make up for the poor visibility by use of lights and special camera equipment. Despite the cloudiness of the water, the seabed around the islands is remarkably rich in life. Swimming over the dense kelp beds, Liz got an early glimpse of a common seal. It didn't seem unduly alarmed. Over a bed of serrated wrack, Liz met a lion's mane jellyfish, a creature with an unpleasant sting. When feeding, it can extend its tentacles up to 10 feet. A sea urchin glowed pink in the lights. And at last, a seal who seemed more curious than afraid. The seals had made their tour inspection. But to what extent would they accept a wetsuited diver as one of themselves? The common seal was the subject of the first part of the Bomford story. It breeds in far more sheltered waters than its relative, the grey seal. They're easy to tell apart. The common seal is a tubbier, friendlier-looking animal with a rounded head, and its breeding habits are quite different. A sheltered cove like this one on Loch Einort is a typical common seal breeding shoreline. There's nothing sheltered about the breeding shores chosen by grey seals. Rocks and open water are their chosen home. Grey seals have longer noses and are nearly twice as heavy. This is a cow. Conveniently, they breed 3 to 4 months after the common seals, so they would form the second part of the Bomford study. Loch Einort in June. Many of the 80 common seals who frequent the loch at breeding time already have their pups and are hauled out on the seaweed-cushioned rocks. Common seals bear their pups literally between the tides. The baby seals have therefore to swim from the moment they're born. Common seals are far more sociable and playful animals than their grey relatives. You have to be a common seal to tell male from female, from a distance anyway. This is probably a male indulging in a little preliminary courtship display, even though the females won't be interested in mating for another 3 months. Seals doze off quite happily in the water, and sometimes even underwater. They like to lounge on the rocks until the rising tide forces them off. Mothers about to pup move away slightly from the rest of the group just before giving birth. There's a great deal of affection between mothers and pups that is lacking in grey seals. The maternal relationship lasts twice as long, as much as 6 weeks. Common seal pups are far more advanced at birth. They're born with a mottled, seagoing coat, having shed their snow-white baby coat in the womb. Being able to swim from birth is a survival characteristic that has served the common seal well. In the days of heavy commercial hunting, the common seal and its pup was far less dependent on the shore, where it was at maximum risk. A 2-day-old pup sets out to explore the seaweed beds. Its mother is nearby and will keep close contact with it. Pups who become separated in the first 2 days of life often become casualties. Mothers feed their young for 4 weeks on some of the richest milk in the animal world. The pups weigh about 20 pounds at birth and then put on about 2 pounds a day. They nearly double their birth weight in the first fortnight. This well-rounded pup is only a week old. Because of the strong maternal bond, common seal pups probably learn a lot by example from their mothers. Mothers always accompany very young pups on their early swimming expeditions and will even support them in the water if necessary. Common seal mothers appear to enjoy playing with their babies in the water. Grey seals have no such family life. The babies have trouble hauling themselves out, so the mothers try to find easy landing places for them. Despite all this care and attention, there are inevitably casualties, usually due to pups becoming separated from their mothers. With no mother to feed it, a lost pup like this one would certainly die within a few days. This 5-day-old orphan was lucky to find a substitute mother who would feed it and take it swimming until it could look after itself. Perhaps it helps a seal pup to imprint on its surrogate mother if she wears a wetsuit and looks something like a seal herself. On occasion, the orphan was liable to mistake the rubber boat for its foster mother. At this stage of the filming, Tony and Liz had their daughters Kiara and Rosie on location with them, and the seal pup joined the children on the beach.
It's time for you to go and catch your own fish, isn't it?
I think he's nice and fat.
Oh, I think he's heavy enough. I think he'll do well. Come on, off you go. I think if we don't follow him...
Come on. Come on, we'll go to the scene. You're not
The pup was now 5 weeks old, and far from wanting to join in beach games, always headed instinctively for the sea. It's far skinnier than it would be at this age in the wild, because it's not fed on seal's milk, which is so rich it's impossible to imitate. Nevertheless, it's fit enough and in time should be able to look after itself. Liz fed it on sprats and herrings. Sprats weren't easy to get and sometimes had to be specially flown to the airfield on the little island of Benbecula. To get used to the idea of hunting fish, she increasingly fed it underwater. All the time the pup was learning to hunt for itself, it was burning up precious body fat. But it had to learn if it was to survive, and the risk of it losing condition had to be taken. By the 8th week, the pup had filled out well, weighed 60 pounds, and was becoming increasingly adventurous. Each day, the young seal met the creatures that would form its future diet: flounders, crabs, small fish, and even shrimps. All along, Tony and Liz knew the day would come when the young seal would say goodbye to them and seek a sea life of its own. At the start of the 9th week, they were certain that the moment was not far off. It was swimming further and further away, and sure enough, one day it didn't return to be fed. Next day, they looked for it close to the rocks where it had disappeared. A young seal surfaced. They were sure it was their orphan. Liz was torn by the desire to call it back to land, but they both realized it had a new life, taking its chances in the ocean. The search for clear water locations where they had a good chance of filming seals underwater took the Bomfords to some of the most spectacular sea scenery in Britain.
Yeah, because you've got so much water being pushed in and out.
Yes.
One favoured spot lay off the cliffs of Mingulay at the southern tip of the Hebridean chain. The trip could only be made by rubber boat on the rare days of calm weather. The reward was that the water here came in deep and clear from the open ocean. The voyage took them past sky-soaring cliffs from which the kittiwakes wheeled in white squadrons. They passed great sea caves and islands with romantic names: Eriskay, Barra, Sanday and Berneray. 200-foot spear points of granite rose from the sea, and all around on the rocky ledges were the seals. This was the ocean home of the seal. Their dog-like heads watched the passing of the rubber dinghy. The cliffs of Mingulay are also the home of seabirds. On the ledges nest kittiwakes, razorbills and guillemots. The Bomfords had come hoping to film seals in clear blue water rather than birds sitting on guano-encrusted ledges. But the auks, the guillemots and razorbills had a surprise for them. Auks fly even better underwater than they do in the air. These auks had spotted a huge shoal of sand eels a little distance from the cliffs. Since this film was taken, sand eels have become very scarce due to overfishing. The eels are processed into fish meal. As a result, species of auks and terns have been unable to find enough to feed their young. A complete ban on sand eeling is the only solution if the auks are not to fly through a world devoid of prey. In underwater flight, auks close their primary feathers and use the whole wing like a paddle. Auks' necks are heavily muscled to give them easy head movement when subjected to underwater pressures. Their skulls are wide, since they contain glands for shedding salt taken in through constant immersion in seawater. Most birds have air compartments in their wing bones to lighten them in flight. Auks' wings lack these air spaces. It helps them submerge. Their wing bones are flattened to give a better angle of attack when flying underwater. The auks weren't the only ones to home in on the sand eels. The Bomfords were hoping for marauding seals. Instead, they suddenly found themselves swimming alongside some white-beaked dolphins. By August, the common seal pups in Loch Einort are independent of their mothers. The time for courtship and mating is here. The seals have just molted to take on their sea coats for winter. Before molting, a common seal like this one is rusty red and its hairs have split ends. Male common seals put on quite a show in courtship display, often porpoising out of the water. It's done to catch the eye of the females. There are all sorts of variations like sensuous wrigglings and splashings. This thrashing about with seaweed is a piece of courtship behavior never previously recorded. The object of all this male showing off is to entice an interested female into the water. That's where the final stages of wooing and mating actually take place. Every activity of the common seal, from child rearing to mating, is done with a certain elegance and grace. Soon after mating, the common seals leave the shoreline for ocean waters. At this time, the grey seals will only just be coming ashore to begin their breeding season. To film the second part of the seal story, Tony and Liz Bomford had to make a rough 5-mile crossing to some even lonelier islands. The monarchs are a low-lying group of islands 5 miles west of Benbecula. Though they themselves are sheltered, the waters around them are torn by some fierce tide rips. Until 1949, the monarchs were inhabited. Then the few shepherds and fishermen returned to the mainland, and even the lighthouse on the island of Chile was deserted. While people lived there, the seals avoided the monarchs. Directly the people left, the seals moved in. The only way the Bomfords could reach the monarchs was in their rubber Zodiac, a wet, bumpy ride in the seas of late September, with wind often acting in opposition to the tide. The seals had already arrived in strength on Stockay, the first of the islands to be colonized by them when the people left. The seals have been breeding successfully on the monarchs since the early 1960s. Today, the islands have the largest grey seal breeding population in the world, producing 4,000 pups each year. Some of the breeding grounds are unusual grey seal habitat, with wide sandy beaches backed by high dunes. The one thing all the monarch seal colonies have in common is that they're sheltered from the worst of the westerlies and have deep water approaches. Though grey seals aren't troubled by rough water and are very much animals of exposed coasts, they much prefer easy access to their breeding sites. Elsewhere, grey seals are often forced by disturbance to breed on stony beaches at the bottom of steep cliffs. In the monarchs, they have a choice of wide open sandy beaches. In late September, the seals converge from hundreds of miles away. At first, they bob about in the waves as if inspecting the place, which is probably near the truth. They've been away at sea for nearly a year. They're cautious. After all, the land isn't their element. A cow comes ashore with a large bull in the background. When they first make landfall, there's a certain amount of play which has nothing to do with breeding or claiming females. It just seems to be caused by high spirits. The Bomfords finally chose a beach on the island of Shawnere, where the high dunes gave a good vantage point. Though the colony was a large one, it represented only a small part of the total monarch breeding population. The haul-out on this one beach before breeding started was 800 seals. But then Britain is home to nearly 2/3 of the world's grey seal population of some 160,000 animals. Half that population breeds in the Hebrides. The scene just after that first haul-out is a fairly peaceful one, as if the seals are relaxing before the rigours of pupping and later on mating begin. The only action at this time comes from immature bulls who won't breed this season. They play fight harmlessly on the tide edge. A real contest between bulls is much fiercer than this. The play fighting isn't confined to young males. Often immature cows and bulls scrap happily together. By late September, the seals have spread out as pregnant cows leave the assembly beach for the breeding beaches nearby. Unlike common seals, grey seal pups are born with a white coat and are pretty helpless during the whole 6 weeks they spend ashore. Black-backed gulls clean up the afterbirth, but they're also a menace to newborn pups, pecking at their eyes. This probably explains why most grey seal mothers give birth at night. They don't have any closely defined territories, but you can see on this beach how each mother with a pup keeps a space around herself. What happens is that the pups move around and the mothers move with them to keep contact. It's vital that a close bond is formed within the first 2 hours, otherwise the pup can wander off and the mother fail to identify and find it. This cow has lost her pup. Grey seal mothers recognize their pups by scent, but she's unsuccessful. The chances of her finding it now are very remote. This newborn pup will be fed by its mother for 17 or 18 days. During the breeding season, the adults feed little, if at all. For cows, this entails a fast of 2.5 weeks. For the bulls, it can mean up to 6 weeks without food. The cows with fast-growing pups to feed lose a great deal of weight. Even without pups in attendance, it's easy to tell cow from bull. Grey seal cows are cream and mottled, bulls far darker. This would be a typical cow, but for the fact that she's lost a flipper, probably bitten off by a killer whale. There's a good deal of bickering amongst the females. This is because the cow's territory is centered round the pup. So when the pup moves, the territory moves also, and this is when the clashes occur. A bull who wanders into the nursery area is likely to be attacked. At the start of the breeding season, a cow can see a bull off just by threatening him. Over 10% of the pups in the colony will fail to survive. Most of these will die from starvation after being deserted by their mothers or becoming lost. The lost ones try to get a feed from anyone, even other pups. The last cows to come ashore have their pups up in the dunes. By then, the beach is already fully occupied. In the dunes, it's easier for a calf to get lost among the hummocks and tufts of marram grass. This orphan is trying to suckle from a pup who is already dead. This pup has survived for nearly 4 weeks. Its white coat is beginning to change, but it is thin and in poor condition. Casualties are inevitable. Eventually, the sand covers them over. It's late October, and the time of the bulls is here. Now the fights are in earnest. Grey seal bulls don't stake out large territories or control harems of cows. Territories exist, even if they're not clearly defined. The owner will always attack an intruding bull on what he considers to be his patch. Unlike the play fights of the immature bulls when they first come ashore, these battles are savage. Bites often cause quite severe injuries. The sheer exhaustion of a prolonged mating season probably defeated this loser. The winner has yet to convince the lady to accept him. The cows come into season almost as soon as their pups are weaned. Directly she's mated, she'll head off back to sea. Once the cow has submitted to his advances, courtship is comparatively chivalrous. In late October, the last of the pups are being weaned. At 18 days, they're nearly fully molted. Any hour now, this pup's mother will desert it and seek a mate. The weaned pups are entirely on their own now. They move up into the dunes to complete their molt. This pup won't feed again until it goes to sea in 2 or 3 weeks. By then, although its mother has left it to its own devices, it's like a little barrel of fat. While it's lying up in the dunes, molting into its sea coat, it will convert that fat into muscle. At the end of 2 more weeks, it's ready to enter its true home, the sea. It's now 6 or 7 weeks old. At last, the young seal is ready to face the wide ocean. The breeding season on the Monarch Isles is coming to its end. After commercial sealing stopped, and until 1988, the British seal population was increasing by 5% a year. This brought it into conflict with fishermen because the seals compete for decreasing fish stocks. They also pass on a destructive parasite called codworm. These common seals were filmed in Oban Harbour, where the trawlermen don't resent seals because they don't compete for the same fish. In other parts, the feeling is different. In the Farne Islands, for instance, where grey seals are thought to ravage homing salmon. Your feeling about seals depends on where you live and how you earn your living. Until recently, the Ministry of Agriculture authorised seal culls on Orkney, but the conservation lobby stopped these, at least temporarily. Now no one seems sure what to do about seal control, except the public, who understandably love the seals with their pleading dog-like eyes. However, a Scottish salmon farmer might feel that this seal approaching his cages is potentially lethal to his livelihood. The coarse outer net is meant to keep the seals out, the fine inner one to keep the salmon in. The trouble is that the tide often pushes the two nets together, making it easy for raiding seals to tear the inner net with their teeth. Then, of course, thousands of valuable salmon escape. Salmon farming is an important new industry, especially in Scotland, where new industries are vital to economic survival. Large areas of sea loch or estuary are netted off and salmon reared by artificial feeding. With natural salmon stocks facing a crisis due to overfishing at sea, salmon farming is perhaps the best chance of preserving the salmon as a valuable, if luxury, food fish. One seal tearing the nets can do untold damage. So it's understandable if commercial fishing interests don't always share the public's enthusiasm for these delightful marine mammals. In Britain as a whole, both species of seal, especially the common, were affected badly by the distemper virus that struck in 1988. So the suggestion that there should be an annual culling of seals to protect fishermen's interests is, for the time being, not on the agenda. It seems the seals may have quite enough to cope with as it is. The lives of seals and seafarers of Britain have been entwined for at least 8,000 years. It is hoped that the seals, the people of the sea, will be around to share that relationship for a very long time yet.